Welcome back to Hardball. Tonight in his Hardball debut, RNC Chairman Reince Priebus, the new head of the Republican Party that has taken a hard turn to the right, we think. Welcome, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask you about the comment. Well, thank you. Let me ask you about this comment made by former Utah Governor Jon Huntsman just yesterday. He tweeted, quote, "To be clear, I believe in evolution and trust scientists on global warming. Call me crazy." That's a sarcastic comment by one of your candidates for president. Is he the odd man out on those issues in your party now?
Well, Chris, I don't know. I'm not doing a poll of all the candidates as to those issues, but this is what's going to happen. We have a rigorous debate. We've got, as you've pointed out many times, we've got a lot of different folks in the field. I happen to believe, Chris, that having a lot of candidates in the field, having a big primary is good for our party. It gets a lot of people out there. It gets a lot of earned media, a lot of TV time, a lot of media, and all the horsepower, I think, is on our side of the aisle right now.
Aren't you worried, though, that in a world where we have to compete with science and technology with Chinese and Indian young geniuses, and some of them move here and some of them are still over in their countries around the world, we're competing in a world of science and technology to be a country that might be led by someone who doesn't believe in evolution, who doesn't believe in climate change, who doesn't believe in the scientific community of his own country, the National Academy of Science, for example, on climate change? Wouldn't that be kind of scary to have somebody who was so anti-intellectual as president?
Well, come on. I mean,
well, would it be? You have the answer to the question. He's your party.
Here's what I think. Here's what I think. I don't think the election is going to be decided on evolution. I think the election is going to be decided on a fundamental question that the American people are going to ask themselves, and they're going to ask themselves whether or not they're better off today than they were 3 or 4 years ago.
Sure, well, that's a good question.
And they're going to answer. And they're going to answer that question.
You win. If that's the issue you want, if it's just about conditions, but I'm asking you about the philosophy of who leads our country. Philosophy is important, right? Isn't it? You guys are always talking about the philosophy of our president. Isn't it fair to ask about you call him a socialist, a lot of your people. Isn't it fair to ask about the philosophy of Perry and Bachman and the rest of them? Isn't that fair to ask about their philosophy?
I don't think it's unfair. I don't think it's unfair, but I can't sit here and tell you what the philosophy is of all 12 candidates and sit here and get into a give and take on each and every one of the candidates.
Well, you're experts on Obama. You call him a socialist.
Well, what I can tell you is that well, wait a minute. I mean, people are going to, I told you what they're going to ask themselves. And they're going to ask themselves whether or not this president's followed through on his promises. And what this president told the American people is that he would cut the deficit in half by the end of his first term. And what did he do? He introduced the biggest structural deficit in the history of America. I mean, the problem with this president, I think you and I can disagree on a lot of things. But I think what we probably can agree on is that he's had a real hard time exhibiting a little leadership. Now, we may differ on what the answer might be, but I think we both can agree that this president has a real hard time leading when our when our country and the people in this country are starving for real, authentic people to lead the greatest country on the face of the earth in the times that are very difficult. And this president has a real hard time with that.
But do you have a hard time with the fact that your party left this country in wreckage with a hemorrhaging unemployment rate? There was booming unemployment, and this president walked in the door. He got into bed when it was on fire. You're right. But you don't point that out, do you? You think you left this bed all made for him, and everything was great when he walked in the door, right? We had a financial community that was going crazy. Everything. Just say that to me. Tell me he walked in the door to hell. Just tell me that first.
Hang on a second, Chris. I don't think that there's any party or any person blameless in any of this.
No, do you think he walked into a good situation you left him with? You're blaming him for everything, but you say Bush wasn't responsible.
This president has a hard time following through on promises. He said the stimulus would create unemployment at less than 8%. Unemployment's been on a sustained range that we haven't seen in over 30 years, Chris.
I know.
We flushed $1 trillion down the toilet, and Americans are hurting. He said he'd cut the deficit in half, biggest structural deficit in the history of the world. Said he'd tackle the debt, and under the policies of Barack Obama, not before him, but on Barack Obama's policies, he put us on a trajectory to accumulate more debt than every single president before him combined, Chris, combined.
Yes, sir. The trouble is that the president who came in before him doubled the national debt, never vetoed a single spending bill in 8 years. Isn't that a problem for your record?
Listen, the president's going to be judged on his record. And his record right now is a catastrophe in regard to this economy. And I think we know that. I mean, we've got a president who's whistling past the graveyard, Chris.
Let me ask you a question.
He's out in Martha vineyard while the rest of America is waiting in line for jobs.
You're scoring all your points. You've got all your points, and you've made them. Now, let me ask you some questions.
I'm not trying to score points.
No, you've scored them. You have scored them, and I think you've got them on the record now. Let me ask you a question, a serious question. What's the difference now between the Republican Party and the Tea Party?
Well, I think there's obviously we're an organized, structured party, and the Tea Party is not. I think it's a group of people who are conservative, independent, people who are disengaged but now engaged. But I will say this. I think it's important to note.
Well, what's the difference in philosophy?
Well, I don't know all the differences because there's 100 different Tea Party groups. But let me tell you something. I think where there's similarities is that we need to get our spending under control. We need to get our debt under control. We need to respect the Constitution. Those are all things that are near and dear to the Republican Party's heart. Now, I'll also tell you that I don't believe the Republican Party is in competition with the conservative movement. We're not competing. You know, they're their own organization or their own entity, and I'm grateful for it because I think it's moved America in the right direction.
Can you name a difference between the parties, between the Republican Party and the Tea Party? Just one difference.
We're a structured organization with a registered entity with the Federal Election Commission. And
no, on policy.
What do you mean on policy?
Is there a difference in policy between the Tea Party people who, and there's new studies now that Tea Party people tend to believe there should be more religion in politics. They basically have a bad attitude towards race, towards black people. They have a bad attitude to immigrants.
But the Tea Party
is that the philosophy of the Republican Party?
But Chris, that's the beauty of the Tea Party. I mean, you can't define what the Tea Party is or who it is or what their beliefs are because they're not an organized entity. I mean, one Tea Party in Rockford, Illinois could have a different view than a Tea Party up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I mean, but the fundamental similarities are that we want to get our country back on track economically. We want to recognize that the government's making promises that it just can't keep, and that we need to get serious about our debt and deficit in this country. Otherwise, we'll be surrendering sovereignty to our bondholders. So, I mean, these are important issues.
Well, let me ask you about your party and the strange part of it. And I agree with a lot of Republicans. I grew up in a Republican family. I was a kid. I was a Republican. I completely understand the call for smaller government.
What happened to you, Chris? What happened?
Well, I studied the issues. Let me ask you about the fact that smaller government, less taxes, they're popular ideas. I understand the appeal of those. But for a long time, Donald Trump, for example, was the leader in the polls among Republicans simply because he challenged the president's legitimacy as an American. There is an appeal in your party to this birther stuff. It's gone on and on. The president had to go out and show his papers, basically, to shut it down. What is it in your party that was so focused that you made Donald Trump your front runner because all he did was raise the birther issue? What happened there?
First of all,
you're an expert on politics.
First of all, I didn't make Donald Trump the front runner. Secondly,
he was the leader in the polls.
Hang on a second, Chris. I mean, I'd never one time questioned this issue. In fact, I threw it away. So, I mean, I'm not on record with that. Our party's not on record with that. But the fact of the matter is what Americans are looking for in this country, and the reason why people like Donald Trump and Rick Perry and other Mitt Romney and the rest of our field, Michelle Bachmann and Sarah Palin, resonate with the American people is that Americans in this country are starving for authentic, real leadership, people with guts and a spine.
Okay.
And this president hasn't been able to exhibit any of those things.
Okay, just one question. Do you believe that Barack Obama is a loyal, patriotic American?
Of course.
Okay, thank you, Reince Priebus. Thank you.